Step out of vehicle now. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, this is my driveway. I live here. Why am I being stopped?
Don't argue with me. You don't belong out here this
I
late.
belong right here. Check the address. That's my
Keep
house.
your hands up or this goes bad real fast.
I'm complying. But you need a reason, or you need to let me go.
Elias Thorne sat frozen in the driver's seat of his pristine silver Audi A8, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the leather steering wheel. The blinding white light of LED tactical beams flooded the interior of his car, bouncing off the rearview mirror and searing his retinas. He had just completed a grueling 16-hour shift at the National Security Agency's Regional Operations Center in Chicago, Illinois. He was 52 years old, a man of quiet dignity and immense responsibility, currently serving as a Deputy Chief of Cryptologic Operations. It was 11:58 p.m. on a frigid Thursday night in November, and he was being treated like a violent fugitive in the driveway of his own colonial-style home in the affluent suburb of Oak Brook. The lead officer approached with a hand hovering aggressively over the grip of his sidearm, barking commands that echoed through the silent, sleeping neighborhood. What transpired over the next 45 minutes would ignite a contentious legal firestorm, exposing the raw and often denied realities of racial profiling in American law enforcement. This incident would strip away the illusion that professional success age or high-level government clearance offers any shield against prejudice. Before we delve into the intricate details of this harrowing event, please take a moment to subscribe if you believe that justice should be equal for everyone regardless of their background. Now let us examine the facts. Elias Thorne had lived in the prestigious tree-lined subdivision of Oak Brook for nearly 7 years. To his neighbors, he was the quiet, courteous professional who walked his golden retriever at dawn and ensured his holiday decorations were tasteful and modest. What the neighborhood did not know was that Thorne was a linchpin in America's cyber defense infrastructure. His daily responsibilities involved analyzing and neutralizing digital threats from hostile foreign state actors. He held a top-secret SCI clearance with a polygraph requirement, a status granted only to those who have withstood the most rigorous invasive background checks the United States government can perform. The government knew everything about Elias Thorne, his finances, his travel history, his psychological profile, and they trusted him with the safety of the nation. On the night of November 12, 2020, Thorne was navigating the final stretch of his commute. His team had been managing a critical intrusion attempt on a power grid network, a high-stress situation that required every ounce of his 30 years of experience. His mind was still whirring with code and threat assessments as he turned into his subdivision. He was exhausted, his body aching, craving nothing more than a hot shower and the silence of his home. As he initiated the turn into his long paved driveway, the world behind him exploded in color. First, it was a single set of headlights tailing him closely. Then, as he braked, the night was torn apart by the strobe of red and blue emergency lights. Within seconds, 3 separate patrol units from the local municipal police department had swarmed the cul-de-sac, blocking his driveway and cutting off any avenue of escape. Thorne felt a cold pit of dread open in his stomach, a sensation distinct from the professional stress he handled daily. He had committed no traffic violation. He was parked in front of the home he owned the mortgage of which he paid every month. Officer Derek Holloway exited the lead cruiser, his demeanor instantly hostile. Holloway was a 10-year veteran of the force known for his aggressive stats. Flanking him were officers Sarah Jenkins and Mike Ross, who took up tactical positions on the passenger side and rear of the Audi. Thorne, knowing the drill all too well from the talk he had given his own sons and received from his father decades ago, slowly lowered the window. He placed both hands at the 10 and 2 position on the wheel, fingers spread wide to show he held no weapon. Officer Holloway did not offer a greeting. He shined his high-intensity flashlight directly into Thorne's eyes, blinding him. He ordered Thorne out of the vehicle immediately. Thorne, speaking with the calm, measured authority of a man used to briefing generals and senators, asked for the reason for the stop. Holloway did not answer. He shouted the command again, his hand twitching near his holster, escalating the tension to a breaking point. Thorne, realizing that logic was currently losing to adrenaline, complied. He unbuckled his seatbelt with slow, deliberate movements, opened the door, and stepped out into the biting November air. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit, a silk tie, and polished Oxfords, the uniform of a high-ranking official. Immediately, Holloway demanded to know what Thorne was doing in this specific area at such a late hour. Thorne, fighting to keep the tremor of rage out of his voice, explained that he lived here. He gestured with a nod of his head toward the house, the front porch light illuminating the address number that matched his license. Holloway demanded identification. Thorne vocalized his actions before taking them, stating clearly that he was reaching for his wallet in his inner jacket pocket. Holloway watched him like a hawk, muscles coiled. Thorne handed over his Illinois driver's license and his government identification card. The license listed the address they were standing in front of 4125 Willow Creek Lane. The government ID identified him as a senior employee of the National Security Agency. A reasonable officer, seeing a 52-year-old man in a suit standing in his own driveway with ID proving residence and high-level government employment, would have immediately de-escalated, apologized, and left. Officer Holloway did not do that. Instead, he began an interrogation. He asked whose car this was. He asked how long Thorne had lived there. He asked where he was coming from. He asked if Thorne had any previous arrests. The questions were rapid-fire, designed to confuse and provoke. Thorne answered every single one with monosyllabic precision. "It is my car." 7 years. Work. No. Holloway took the documents and retreated to his cruiser, leaving Thorne standing in the cold, illuminated by the spotlights of the other 2 cars, while Officer Jenkins circled the Audi, shining her light into the back seat, looking for something. Anything. Neighbors were beginning to wake up. Blinds were twitching. Porch lights were flicking on. Thorne stood there, a man who commanded teams of brilliant analysts, now reduced to a spectacle for his neighbors' amusement or suspicion. He felt a profound sense of humiliation washing over him. He had spent his life serving the Constitution, yet here on his own concrete, the Fourth Amendment seemed to have evaporated. Inside the cruiser, Holloway ran the license. It came back clean, immaculate. No warrants, no traffic history. The vehicle registration matched the name and the address. There was zero discrepancy. Despite this, Holloway returned to Thorne and dropped a bombshell. "I need to search the vehicle," he stated flatly. Thorne, his patience fraying but his discipline holding, asked for the probable cause. Holloway claimed they had received a call about suspicious activity involving a vehicle in the area and that Thorne's Audi matched the description. Thorne knew his rights. He refused the search. He stated clearly that he did not consent to a search of his private property. Holloway's demeanor shifted from aggressive to menacing. He told Thorne that refusing the search was obstructionist and made him look guilty. He implied that if Thorne had nothing to hide, he would simply open the trunk. Thorne stood his ground. He reiterated that he had identified himself, proven his residence, and that without a warrant or probable cause, no search would occur. He asked, "Am I being detained or am I free to go inside my home?" The standoff lasted for 20 excruciating minutes. Officer Ross asked Thorne if he had any narcotics in the car. Thorne, who underwent mandatory random drug testing for his clearance, simply stared at him in disbelief. The officers conferred in hushed tones. They had nothing. They knew they had nothing. Yet the desire to assert dominance, to force submission, kept them there. Finally, Holloway thrust the license back at Thorne. "You're lucky tonight," he sneered. "Fix your taillight." There was nothing wrong with the taillight. It was a parting shot, a final attempt to assert control. The 3 cruisers backed out, tires crunching on the gravel, leaving Elias Thorne standing alone in the dark. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline dump and the sheer impotent fury of the innocent. He looked at his house, then at his hands. He was a black man in America. That was the only variable that mattered tonight. Not his rank, not his salary, not his address. Thorne went inside, poured a glass of water, and sat in his kitchen in the dark. He didn't sleep that night. He replayed the interaction frame by frame. He thought about his sons, both in college. What if it had been them? What if they had panicked? What if they had reached for a phone too quickly? The terror of what could have happened eclipsed the anger of what did happen. The next morning, at 0800 hours, Thorne did not go to the NSA. He went to the headquarters of the police department and filed a formal internal affairs complaint. He wrote a detailed memorandum of record, a skill honed by decades of intelligence work. He listed the times, the badge numbers, the specific dialogue, and the lack of probable cause. He noted the officer's demeanor and the blatant disregard for the evidence of his residency. The Internal Affairs Division opened a file. The investigator, Sergeant Miller, interviewed Holloway. Holloway stuck to his script. A concerned citizen had called 911 reporting a suspicious vehicle possibly involved in a string of garage burglaries. He claimed Thorne had been evasive and combative, justifying the heightened response. Thorne, however, was not a man to be stonewalled. He hired a top-tier civil rights attorney, Elena Rostova. They immediately filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the 911 dispatch tapes and the dashcam footage. The department dragged its feet, citing ongoing investigation exemptions, but Rostova forced their hand through a court order. When the 911 tape finally arrived, it was the smoking gun. The caller, an elderly woman living 3 streets over, had indeed reported a suspicious vehicle. She described a rusted older model red pickup truck with a loud muffler that had been idling near a mailbox. Elias Thorne drove a 2020 silver Audi A8. There was absolutely no correlation. No reasonable officer could mistake a brand-new silver luxury sedan for a rusted red pickup truck. The location was different. The vehicle was different. The suspicious activity was different. Holloway had lied. He hadn't stopped Thorne because of the call. He had stopped Thorne because he saw a black man driving an expensive car in a wealthy neighborhood late at night. The 911 call was merely a convenient, albeit flimsy, shield for racial profiling. The internal investigation dragged on for 5 months. Thorne returned to his duties protecting the nation's secrets, but the bitterness remained. He noticed the police cruisers slowed down whenever they passed his house now. It felt less like protection and more like intimidation. When the Internal Affairs report concluded, the findings were a slap in the face. They exonerated Officer Holloway of racial profiling, citing officer discretion, and stating that while the vehicle description didn't match, the officer acted in good faith to investigate potential criminal activity in a high-alert area. They recommended a verbal counseling for procedural errors regarding the length of the detention, but nothing more. No suspension, no written reprimand. Thorne was done playing by their rules. In February 2021, he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. The suit named Officer Derek Holloway, the police department, and the municipality. It alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment unreasonable seizure and the 14th Amendment equal protection violations racial profiling. The discovery phase of the lawsuit peeled back the layers of the department's practices. Rostova and Thorne's legal team requested 5 years of traffic stop data for the department. The statistics were damning. The data analysis showed that while black drivers made up only 4% of the local residential population and estimated transient traffic, they accounted for 18% of all traffic stops. Furthermore, once stopped, black drivers were searched 3.5 times more often than white drivers, yet contraband was found on white drivers at a slightly higher rate. This statistical anomaly is a classic indicator of bias-based policing. Officers are searching minority drivers on hunches rather than evidence, leading to a lower hit rate for finding crimes. Thorne's lawyers also dug into Holloway's personnel file. They found a pattern. Over his 10-year career, Holloway had 12 citizen complaints. 10 were from minority motorists. All alleged rudeness, aggression, and lack of probable cause. The department had dismissed every single one as unfounded. Holloway was a problem officer who had been protected by a system designed to insulate itself from accountability. The lawsuit garnered national attention. Major news outlets picked up the story. NSA deputy chief profiled in driveway. The optics were terrible for the department. Here was a man who had passed the most stringent vetting process on Earth, yet couldn't pass the eye test of a local patrolman. It highlighted the absurdity and the tragedy of bias. If Elias Thorne wasn't safe from profiling who was, as the trial date approached in late 2022, the city's attorneys realized they were in a losing position. The mismatch between the 911 call and Thorne's car was indefensible. The dashcam footage showed Thorne being perfectly calm, while Holloway was aggressive. The statistical evidence suggested a systemic problem. A jury trial would likely result in a massive verdict and potentially a federal consent decree overseeing the department. Settlement negotiations began. Thorne made it clear this wasn't about the money. He earned a comfortable salary. This was about change. He refused to settle unless specific non-monetary terms were met. He wanted an overhaul of the department's body camera policy, mandating that cameras be active the moment a stop is initiated with severe penalties for non-compliance. He demanded an independent audit of all traffic stops for the next 5 years to monitor for racial disparities. In January 2023, a settlement was reached. The municipality agreed to pay Elias Thorne $650,000. It was one of the largest settlements for a non-physical force traffic stop in the state's history. But the policy changes were the real victory. The department agreed to implement a new early warning system to identify officers with statistical disparities in their stops. They agreed to revise their search and seizure training. Officer Holloway was removed from patrol duties and reassigned to an administrative role where he would have no interaction with the public pending a further independent review of his past cases. The $650,000 came from the city's general liability fund taxpayer money. The citizens of the town were effectively paying for the prejudices of their police force. Elias Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for young men who couldn't afford attorneys. He continued his work at the NSA, but the innocence of his suburban life was gone. He knew that the uniform he wore during the day, the suit, the badge, the clearance meant nothing the moment he sat behind the wheel of his car at night. The lesson for the audience is this: compliance does not guarantee safety, and success does not grant immunity from prejudice. We often tell ourselves a comfortable lie that if you work hard, follow the rules, dress well, and speak politely, you will be treated with respect. Elias Thorne did all of those things. He was the model citizen. He was part of the very apparatus of national security. Yet in the eyes of a biased system, his individual achievements were erased, and he was reduced to a stereotype the moment he entered a specific space. This story teaches us that we cannot purely behave our way out of systemic racism. Individual excellence by members of marginalized groups is not a cure for the structural flaws in our justice system. The solution requires rigorous accountability, the courage to document and challenge injustice, even when it is exhausting, and the understanding that rights which are conditional are not rights at all, they are privileges. Until the law is applied blindly to the person and not the profile, none of us are truly free. Furthermore, it highlights the power of documentation. Thorne's ability to stay calm and then immediately file a detailed written complaint, followed by the pursuit of the raw data. The 911 tapes is what turned a "he said, she said" incident into a victory for civil rights. Justice requires not just truth, but proof. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in holding power accountable, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on how we can bridge this gap in our communities.